I'm Jeremy Klein, and this is Change Work Life. Hello and welcome to Change Work Life, the show that's all about beating the Sunday evening blues and enjoying Mondays again. This week we're talking to Natalie Weller-Cliff, who is the founder of two businesses. She has Social and Local, which is a marketing agency, and also Dogs Like Yours, in which she helps owners of dogs with behavioural issues overcome those issues. In this interview, we talk about why and how Natalie decided to do marketing a little bit differently from the way it was being done before, and how she's managed to build in social enterprise into the DNA of the company, whilst also balancing two different businesses. Here's the interview with Natalie Weller-Cliff. Hi Natalie, welcome to the Change Work Life podcast.
Hello.
Can you start off by telling us a bit about what you do? I gather that you've got two things going on at the moment.
Yes, I have two things. They're both linked by behaviour, one human, one dog. So I am a strategic marketing consultant and I specialise in behaviour change campaigns. So the kind of campaigns where rather than selling stuff, which you'd normally have in marketing, it's more about changing unhealthy habits. So things like Change for Life, where you're trying to address issues around childhood obesity. So that's one side of my life. And the other side of my life is canine behaviour. So working with dogs that have problems that owners are finding difficult to deal with, helping owners and dogs to change that problem behaviour into something more manageable.
Wow, okay. And these are both your own businesses at the moment?
Yes, I founded the marketing one with a former colleague of mine, I think 8 years ago now. And the canine behaviour business I was doing informally for a while and turned it into a business last year.
So let's talk about how you got to running your own marketing business. Was your background before you started your own business, presumably you were working in marketing before that?
Yeah, I was. I started in advertising in an agency in London, very typical work in a London ad agency. So lots of fun, lots of variety, but also lots of long hours, very long commute, early in on the train, late back, quite often needing to stay either to work on projects that needed to go off to print or later into sort of digital, and lots of entertaining and things like that as well. That was my start and my life for most of my 20s and into my 30s. So typical office job, very full on.
How did you get into that in the first place? Was this your first thing out of university?
It wasn't actually. Out of uni, I did two things. I fell back on a skill I had already, which was teaching. I'd lived in Germany as a teenager and made some quite good money on the side teaching English as a foreign language, with the bonus that I was English speaking. So it seemed a bit of a win-win way of earning a bit of extra cash. I enjoyed teaching. And I'd done a year abroad. I did a languages degree and I'd done a year abroad teaching in Germany in my third year. Teaching in a German high school. And so when I left uni, I combined that ability with a lifelong passion for wanting to live in Japan. And I went out to Japan and I taught for a year in a Japanese high school with a scheme called the JET scheme, the Japanese English Exchange, I think it is, English Teacher Exchange, that is run by the British Council and that takes graduates from the UK, from Australia, from the States and from Canada and places them in Japanese schools. So a very different start.
How did you get into marketing after that then?
So I came back from a very exciting year in Japan and felt like I didn't want to do uni school, that I wanted to try office life and do something different. But that's really as far as my thinking was. I just had a sense that I wanted to do something else rather than go straight into teaching. I mean, that would have been probably the more logical move for me at that point. I read a book, which is an oldie but goodie, if you've heard of it, but it's called What Colour is Your Parachute?
I have heard of it, yes.
It's quite a famous one. At the time, it really helped me. I worked through it quite systematically. It encourages you to plot out, not only sort of what you think you might like to do from a skills point of view, but to think about where you want to work and what size of business, what you're earning, you'd like to be earning in the sort of near and distant future. And it kept pointing me towards advertising as a job that was a good way of combining my skills in terms of creativity. So I like to do things like art and drawing, and but also a sort of business sense and an interest in a more sort of business-like environment. So it was that drew me into advertising. Then I was a bit stuck because I didn't really know how to get into advertising and what to do, and I didn't have any skills in that area. And long story short, my sister got me a job serving cocktails to my future boss. And I basically taught my way into a job as a PA in his company because that was the only job going at the time. And on the agreement that I'd do a year as his PA, and then he'd let me have a go at being an account executive in the advertising team. And that's what happened.
Okay, and you went from there to staying as an account executive?
Yes, so I stayed stuck with the advertising for a few years in a very traditional sense, so selling things from books to whiskey and everything in between. It was a varied job, quite pressured, but it was varied. But I was beginning to get a little sense of being quite unfulfilled, just flogging stuff. Unusually for somebody who works in brand, I wasn't always that interested in the brands, in that I didn't, a lot of people would go cock a hoop for the chance to work with Nike or something, and I was a bit like, okay, but flogging trainers. So I was already on the lookout for something else, and I started a job with a company who did this early days of this behaviour change marketing, but it wasn't really recognised as such at the time. And said we were asked to work on this campaign that the government, Department of Health at the time, was planning to reverse the tide of childhood obesity. That was the objective. That was the beginning of discovering something a little more fulfilling for me in terms of the marketing side, in that I discovered this whole behaviour change world, and that I could use my skills in marketing to help people to be healthier or fitter, or I worked on all sorts of campaigns, actually, anti-smoking, promoted apprenticeships. Currently, because it's something I still enjoy very much, promoting healthier eating and safer eating practices with the Food Standards Agency. So I found a way out of just promoting things and more into this behaviour change. And in parallel, I did a self-funded course in NLP, in neuro-linguistic programming, and coaching, and found that really complementary. It's very helpful, actually, to have that skill on top of the behaviour change comms side of things.
And so you're still working in London at this point for an agency, albeit one that deals with the change campaigns?
Yes, still working in London. Then the old itchy feet again. So I was enjoying the behaviour change work. I wasn't so much enjoying being in an office. The commute by this time was beginning to grind. Standing on the 7:18 train into London every day. I'm not that tall, so I'm generally armpit height. So I didn't really enjoy sort of being squished up against people for a good 30 minutes into London. And there were other things that were beginning to niggle. One of them was that I actually wanted a dog, and I couldn't do that when I was doing the hours that I was doing in London. It came to a bit of a crisis point at the place that I was working, not untypical for my industry. There was a bit of a budget hole. A lot of people were let go. I wasn't one of them, but I wasn't particularly happy remaining in the situation that I was. And so that's when, with a colleague who had been let go, I decided to launch my own business with her. And it is a marketing or Marcom's consultancy, but we launched it as something a little bit different. We launched it as a social enterprise. So it's a community interest company, which means that by law, we distribute 50% of our profit to a social cause.
And what social causes have benefited from that so far?
So over the years, we put it towards a number of different community projects. But in the last few years, we've focused on mental health in the advertising and marketing industry. From personal experience and some of the things I've been talking about, the long hours rather than flexible hours, something, dare I say, a bit of a bullying culture in advertising. And that was sort of playing on our minds. I mean, it's an industry as well that is very difficult for people to remain in if they are parents and have childcare responsibilities, or if they're a carer and have responsibilities at home, again, because of the hours. We have more recently focused our efforts on a campaign that we are running alongside the government communications services, which is called Brilliant Creative Minds. And it's about addressing the avoidable stresses that are inherent within our industry at the moment and that damage people's potential to be creative. We have, with Brilliant Creative Minds, we're looking at those sort of poor behaviours that cause problems for people, that stress them out, that make it hard for them to stay in the job and to be good at that job, to be creative. And we're working systematically with other agencies, with clients, with procurement, to address those problem behaviours and try to do something about them. So people can be happier at work, because you really have to be happy to be creative in the main. So yeah, that's what we've put our time and funding to over the last few years.
So going back to this time where people have been let go, you're not one of them. What were you looking for at the time that led you to effectively starting your own agency? What were some of the alternatives that you considered rather than going down that route?
So the alternative was leaving the industry, which felt like a little bit of a waste at the time, having built up, a good decade plus worth of experience at that point. But at the time, some of the things that I wanted, so I wanted to ditch the commute. I wanted to be able to work from home more, partly so I could have a dog, but also looking at the hire and fire culture within the industry. There weren't really alternatives to that. And the other thing that was happening at the time was social enterprise was beginning to be more of a thing, more established. But most social businesses were being run and they offered something social in themselves. So it might be, taking on broken bikes and upcycling them and then giving them to kids who don't have a bike, that kind of thing, which are great businesses. But I was looking for a way of continuing to earn my living at the time doing marketing consultancy and give something back. And there was nothing. There was literally nothing. We know that because when we founded the company and decided to found it as a community interest company, a CIC, we had to go through some hoops to persuade the regulator that one could run a mainstream business offering mainstream services and still be a CIC and have this profit share element. It's quite strictly regulated, the CIC world, and there wasn't anything like us in it at the time. Yeah, the alternative really was quit, or I guess go and do marketing for a charity or something like that, which at the time didn't necessarily appeal. The idea of going client side, as it's called, leaving agency rather than going client side.
Why was it important to be a CIC? I mean, why not build up a successful business which then does philanthropic stuff on the side, supporting causes, making donations, all that sort of thing?
At the time, it was credibility. The idea of doing good, of course, was something that businesses did and the ad world did, but it was very much lip service. So the idea of being a good business might be saying you're a good business and maybe doing a day's volunteering or something like that. And certainly I've done my fair share of that within corporates and seen my corporate clients do the same. But we just felt it wasn't very credible, and if we were going to be taken seriously as a social enterprise, it was better at the time to go the whole hog and to have a legal construct that made it something that we had to do rather than something that we were pretending to do, which sadly a lot of the industry was doing at the time. So that was the reason. It's now a little bit, it's more mainstream, and we could have, if we were founding today, we might have founded as, say, a B Corp company instead, which has very strict guidelines to it. It's a certification, but it's not necessarily a legal construct. But at the time, that just wasn't really available. It was around, but it wasn't established. And at the time, we wanted to make sure that people realised we were putting our money where our mouth was. And forming as a CIC gave us that legitimacy as a social enterprise.
I'm just interested as to who you were doing it for. I mean, you mentioned that it gives you the credibility and the legitimacy, and that other organisations sort of say that they do all this charitable stuff, but it's a bit more lip service. I mean, why not just be a normal, for want of a better word, brand agency, but who does actually do that? And you know it does that. I mean, why was it necessary to take this additional step with all the extra bureaucracy and responsibility?
I just think because it's too easy to say you're a social business and not really live it. In all respects and purposes, we are a normal brand agency. We do work for corporations, for national charities, for government departments. So largely large organisations, that's the focus. And the work we do often has a social element to it, but not always. We don't restrict ourselves in that sense, albeit we do tend to appeal to clients who like the fact that by keeping us in business, they are doing good. But it just boils down to that credibility. We decided to go the whole hog to really make a statement about it. And interestingly, actually, we're just beginning to get recognition for it. So it's been 8 years, as I said, since we founded, and we're starting to win awards, Better Society Awards and Female Frontier Awards and things like that as recognition for having founded as a CIC and, run a business for this time and passed on a considerable amount of money in that time. I mean, we really are tiny. We're a micro business. And the other thing we've done, and I think we're getting as much credit for this as we are as for the profit share element, is I feel like we really pioneered the idea of flexible working and working from home in a real way in an industry where people said it just couldn't be done. And again, we have evidence for that. In the early days, we told people that we didn't have, or people within the industry, that we didn't have an office, that we had a network of home workers, that our creative teams were not sat right under our noses where we could monitor what they were doing. Which is typical in an agency, that we gave them a brief and told them what we needed and trusted that they would return with their ideas within the given time frame. And we were told that that was crazy and it wouldn't work. That what we should do is go and hire a big old office somewhere, get lots of junior people in, pay them rubbish money and charge them out high. We were deemed a bit nuts. But this, I think, again, what's really changed in the time since we founded is the idea of having home workers and no office is something we didn't promote much when we first started. We had an office, as a front, if you like, that we could take clients to if we needed to. But we've abandoned that now because we know it makes our clients feel good to know that we are employing people who are therefore able to combine using their brains and their experience as, planners and creatives and copywriters and project managers, whatever their skills are, and they can combine that with being a parent or a carer. They can, work with us and do the school run. And, it's a model that really works, and you can see it in the quality of the work. So it's something that we're proud of. We set out that way partly for practicality, that I wanted to homework. So that was a driver, but also the cost of overheads. Office space in London is very expensive, and it was or is one of the reasons why there is such a hire and fire culture often in agencies. If you're maintaining a very fancy office in a very sort of desirable postcode in London and you lose a key client, you have to get rid of people in order to keep paying that rent. And we were looking at aspects like that of the business and saying, we don't need it. We don't need to be sat in an office to have people working.
So what does your business look like now in terms of employees or people who work for you? I mean, are they all employees or do you have consultants? What's the sort of shape at the moment?
We have a blend. So as a business, the number of employees is very small, so about 5 on the employed basis. And then we have a network of about 20 people that we work with on a very regular basis, but they are freelancers, so they're contracted in. We call them our community because they've worked with us for almost the entire time. We've had far more loyalty from our freelancers than we have probably or would have had if we'd had straight employees. And again, it's a model that suits. So it means that when we need somebody for a job, we can work with the person we think is best suited to it rather than the person who happens to be, underutilized and sitting in a chair in that expensive London office. And it works for our freelance community because they can work on projects for us, but they can also work on other things, or some of them have side interests, different interests, but they're not sort of stuck at their desk all day doing the same thing. So it happens to work both ways. But yeah, we've grown and we're always adding people into that community. We said from the outset, in addition to founding as a CIC, that we didn't want to get very big. There is a tipping point in a lot of businesses where you grow to a size where the extra demands on you and the extra financial burden, the logistics involved, HR issues, etc. We didn't want to face into that. So we've kept the business fairly small at its core.
Were there any particular challenges that you had to overcome, perhaps surprising challenges that you weren't expecting in moving from the office-based model to the remote working model?
Actually, one surprise we had was that people were willing from the get-go to give us business, actually a positive surprise. Our first client that we picked up that we hadn't worked with before was Bernardo's. They asked to see us because they'd been told by a friend at a party, I think, about these two women who had founded a social enterprise and were marketeers. And they invited us in to have a coffee, and we thought that was it. I thought they were just being nice to us, and we sat and we explained our business model and what we were doing and why we'd done it, etc. And nearly an hour passed, and the client very politely went, "So this project that I have that I'd like you to work on," and we nearly fell off our chairs. We didn't realize for a second she was actually trying to give us some business. So that was a bit of a positive surprise, that the model appealed to her just inherently, that she wanted to work with us because she thought it was good. What we were doing was good. The negativity came from within our industry. Said we had several people saying that we were just a bit nuts. I think a few shocks around some people's inability to understand the social model, therefore assuming that we weren't astute in our business sense. So, for example, we had several people misunderstand the 50% profit share and thought that we were giving away 50% of what we were invoicing. So if we were invoicing, say, 30,000 for a particular project, that we were giving away half of that 30,000, which of course is not true. It's the 50% on the profit. The people who had that kind of attitude were really quite vicious in their sense of that we were just, these silly, fluffy jumpers, just do-gooders. And we weren't expecting that. We weren't expecting people to misunderstand the model so completely, and also to therefore make this assumption about us being uncommercial. And, that has changed, and people now recognize that you can run a social business and be commercially very successful. But in the early days, we had a few moments where people were being really quite unkind about us because they didn't understand the business model.
Were these prospective clients or former colleagues or other people in the industry?
Both actually.
And what effect did it actually have on the business? Or did it have an effect on the business, or did it just make you feel rather put out?
The effect it had actually was recognizing who is for us in terms of the right kind of client and who isn't. So whilst it stung a bit, there were a couple of pitches that we lost because we were a social business and said they didn't understand it. And, sometimes given directly in the feedback. So it was a bit galling to have done a pitch and to have done good work and then be told that you didn't get the job because they thought you didn't understand maths properly. Yeah, I think it made us realize that those kind of clients weren't the right kind of clients. And one thing that has been noticeable for us running the business is that we've had a lot of loyalty from a lot of our clients. They've been with us from very early on and keep coming back. Now, we have to do good work for that as well. We're not let off the hook in any way around the quality of work. And I'd say anybody thinking about running a social enterprise themselves, it is a very rewarding business model, but you have to be good at the work. It can't be a compensation for poor work. But we have had a lot of loyalty. And I think a lot of that is because we are a CIC, because we appeal to a certain type of client who sort of gets a slightly bigger picture, and because we're very transparent. That's another side of the profit share. Our finances are really an open book because we have to declare to the regulator at the end of each year what profit we'd made, and then make sure that we share, we portion off the 50% for the social cause.
Let's talk about dogs. So you said that one of the reasons why you wanted to give up the commute was because you wanted to have a dog, and now you've started this dog behaviour business. How did that start? You said it's been going for a year and sort of started out just helping out others. Was that right?
Yes, the very start of it was that little dog that I'd been hankering after and couldn't have because I was doing this incredibly long, busy day in London for an ad agency. So after quitting and after forming the marketing consultancy and social enterprise, did that for about a year to make sure that it was actually going to work. And then finally fulfilled an ambition to get a little dog, a little chihuahua called Alfie. And, it was all lovely for the first few months. And then he started to develop some behavioral problems. In fact, he turned into a bit of a hell dog after a while. I'm grateful for his small size, because if he'd been big, we'd have been in serious trouble. So, he just started to bark on every walk and was nipping at people and wouldn't eat, and all sorts of problems. And it was very stressful running a business and trying to manage this dog that had been this dream and has turned into a bit of a nightmare. And I knew I needed to help him. I didn't really know how. These weren't sort of traditional obedience problems. I realised it wasn't just a case of that I hadn't trained him. I'd taken him to puppy school and all that kind of stuff. But I really was a bit at sea, and I started to self-educate on dogs with behavioural problems and reactive dogs, and really got into it. And that's how the dog business started. So in parallel to doing the behaviour change work with my clients, I was beginning to get into behaviour change with dogs and became quite fascinated by it. It really is a science. As I was beginning to do some professional qualifications and I needed to broaden my own experience, that's when I started to do the volunteer work, basically borrowing any problem dog that I could and working with the owners on the problem behaviour. And it just got to a point where really it didn't make sense for it to not be a business. It was something that I felt I could do alongside my marketing consultancy work. By this time, I'd dropped down to 3 days, and have dropped down to 3 days with my marketing consultancy business. Got a very capable team, so I don't need to necessarily be working full time in that business anymore. And so I founded Dogs Like Yours, which is the canine behaviour business, because I really enjoy it, and I like that variety. It's quite nice, to have some days where I'm wrapping my head around how to launch a new product for a major supermarket, and the next day I'm figuring out how to help a dog that can't cope with people coming close to the owner, and it really does engage my brain. And there's also a complementary, one is an office job and I'm sat a lot, and the other is going out and meeting people and working with individuals. And the glue between, apart from the behaviour change, is also the coaching. That's been really useful in the dog business, having the NLP and coaching experience, because for owners who have difficult dogs, and obviously I understand where they're coming from because I was that owner, it's very stressful, and you do need help dealing with the stress and anxiety that comes with having a dog that's behaving badly.
You mentioned that you dropped down to 3 days. Was that with a view to starting this business, or was that something that you just wanted to do anyway?
Yes, it was to enable the dog business. I was finding that I was working pretty much without a break, trying to do my main marketing work and, at the time doing the voluntary work with behaviour cases, and they can be quite intense. And one thing I have tried to do in my sort of later stage of the career is to keep some balance between work and life. In my early days in advertising, it was all work. It was very intense. And there were times when it was too stressful and, I would get very angry or just be very irritable because I was just so tired. And looking back, I don't quite know how I got through some of those early years. It really was intense work. And so through social and local, I had already held that back somewhat. By home working, I eliminated largely the need for a commute, and that gave me a few hours back from the get-go, but also helped me to feel more settled. And when you homework, I think you concentrate very well, but you can also get other things done. It's just a more efficient lifestyle, really, without a lot of the stress. That was something that I'd already put in place. But then adding the dog behaviour work on top of running and doing the marketing work was beginning to tip that balance again the wrong way. And I said that the marketing business was mature enough that I could reduce the time that I was working there in order to focus a little bit more on the dog business.
So what was the appeal of the dog business? I mean, you mentioned that you had the experience with your own dog, but why when at the time you were running an agency full time, did you decide that you wanted to take this on and start helping other people?
I think it's partly my good old fashioned itchy feet again. We seem to have sort of a 8 to 10 year cycle where I start to go, what else can I do? So I do think there's something in that. I am realizing that I quite enjoy, I guess, what people call a portfolio career. I like to have different things going on. And I also quite like to learn. The dog aspect actually added new learning. And actually that's been, I said, it's been useful for my marketing business as well, learning more about behavior per se and about, the neuroscience of behavior. So and I quite enjoy seeing connections between the two jobs, even though they appear so different on paper. There's a lot of similarities. So that was really a driver. I think, itchy feet and learning might even be genetic, because I didn't really think about it. I realized that my dad does, he used to run several jobs. He used to run a few desktop publishing companies and a cycle hire, which was his passion. And I didn't really think about it at the time when I started to go down the path of doing the marketing and the canine behaviour work. Perhaps it just sort of suits our personalities not to do one thing, but to have a combination of things.
I'm just wondering why it had to be a business, though, why you couldn't just sort of do the dogs on a voluntary basis and, just sort of keep it as I don't want to say a hobby, but, something that isn't, an income generating thing, that isn't a business.
It's a really good question, and it's something I did think about, carrying on doing the work on a voluntary basis. And I think there's two reasons why I chose not to. One is that I am quite commercial. I like to be able to earn and stand on my own 2 feet. It felt more right to be making some money from the canine behaviour work, not least because there has and is quite a considerable investment when I add up, the training and the qualifications I have, the kit, the insurance. There are costs associated with doing it in a more legitimate way. So I didn't want to be completely funding that myself, albeit I could have looked at it as a hobby. And the other thing is really a recognition around human behavior, that when you do something for free, it's not always valued and not always recognized as something that's real. And that's a problem in canine behavior, because if you do have a dog that's got a problem, and quite often I'm dealing with dogs that have quite serious problems. So they have bitten people, their owners or strangers, or they're getting into fights, or they're barking the house down, and people can't sleep and are really distressed by the dog's behaviour. So these are serious problems, and I need the owners to take them seriously. And I found with some of the voluntary work, not all, but with some, that people tend to invest more in the training of their dog if they have invested some money.
This is really interesting. It actually goes back to an interview I did with Jacques Hopkins. I'll link to the episode in the show notes. He has a business where he basically teaches people to play the piano, but online through it's an automated sort of course series of his videos, that sort of thing. He doesn't actually sort of do live lessons, but he was saying in terms of pricing, his pricing is actually quite high for what he does. But when people fork out that sort of money, it gives them the extra commitment. It's the extra, the extra impetus. It's I've spent this much money. It's the accountability. I've spent this much money, so I'd better follow through with it.
And it's true. And I think, almost, it might sound weird, but almost from a responsibility point of view, I would rather be working with owners who are committed. And that includes being willing to spend some money in order to commit back. It's a lesson I learned actually early on in my career when I started to manage people. And as a manager, I guess because I do have quite a social outlook and loving learning, I also enjoy teaching. So that I had that from my early years. And I would invest quite a lot of time and personal effort into the people who were on my team. But I'd sort of learned the hard way that some people reciprocate that effort and become brilliant team members and, are great to work with. And others become quite lazy and just rely on you to do, stuff. And they get a sort of learned helplessness about them, or they just think, this is great. If I pretend I don't know what I'm doing, she'll do it for me. And so I came a little bit more hard-edged in that respect. and started to look at it as more of a reciprocal relationship, that I would put effort in if effort was coming back the other way. And really, I've taken that into the canine behaviour business. And it's critical, because if an owner does nothing themselves about their dog. I mean, there's stuff I can do without them present and work with them. But if the owner has zero commitment to making changes themselves, their dog is probably not going to improve, may even get worse. I've taken that lesson of effort in and knowing how to have people value something that you're doing. And in this case, charging for what I'm doing is a way to create that value relationship from the outset. And then I give a lot to my clients. I will give them extra time if they need it. I do the dog behavior work that's paid for, but if they need coaching, I do that as a sort of free addition. It works in that way. There's a balance there. But I found working for free often left me feeling very dissatisfied, because I didn't think people were necessarily understanding the issues they had and what they needed to do, and were being a little bit blasé about it.
That makes complete sense. So in terms of your place in the two businesses, where's that going for you? Sort of keeping it as it is, going more towards the dog training away from the marketing? What's the future hold for you?
At the moment, it's in balance. I think in an ideal world, I would like to get it more equal. So more 50-50 on the marketing versus the canine behaviour. So, that would be an ambition in the short term. And I think, as I said before, I'm very driven by learning new things. And of course, the canine behaviour world is, really opening up from my point of view, but also as a field of understanding, it's really developed a long way, partly because of things like neuroscience and being able to understand, what's going on internally with dogs rather than just observing what they're doing. And so there is a strong pull towards the canine behaviour, because I've learned a lot, but there's so much more to learn, and that's very exciting. And I would quite like to expand that side of the business and to look at ways in which I can reach clients and customers beyond the current sort of traditional time money exchange. So at the moment, the business is a traditional model. You pay me a fee, I'll turn up and give you a certain amount of time looking after your dog. I'm looking at ways to change that. So a bit like your example you gave of the guy who gives the online piano teaching, and still, and enjoying whilst doing that business, learning and working with different people and working with different types of dogs. So that's probably the appeal is on the dog side, and the marketing is my sort of steady Eddie, if you like. It's the one that I know the job well now, and I do it well, but it's perhaps not got the excitement attached, but I still get satisfaction out of doing a good job for my clients and working my brain, just being a little bit more selective perhaps around what I do on the marketing side.
You mentioned the book, What Colour is Your Parachute? Are there any other particular resources as you've been on this learning journey which have particularly helped you, whether it's been sort of mindset, running a business, any quotes, books, courses, anything that's been particularly useful or inspiring for you?
I think there's a couple of things that spring to mind. There's another book I found really useful called StrengthsFinder, or StrengthsFinder 2.0, which I think is a book published by Gallup. But StrengthsFinder 2.0 is interesting because it aims to find your natural strengths and help you to develop them. So it comes with a code, a unique code, and you do an online test that's quite in depth, and then it reveals your sort of individual results, and then you use the book to read up on what those results mean and what it can mean for you. And that book helped me quite a lot a few years ago, when again I wasn't quite sure where to develop my marketing career, and we didn't have quite the right team blend. So it was interesting. We got the whole team to use them. Once I'd used it, and asked the whole team to use the StrengthsFinder book, and that actually helped with sort of colleague to colleague relationships as well, and recognizing, where strengths were and building on those strengths rather than sort of where there were tensions and wondering why there were tensions, sort of recognizing that to different innate abilities. So that was helpful. And the other thing that was helpful to me, surprisingly, was doing a course in improv, which was something a friend dragged me into. And I was very not keen, and I'm really not a performer. I'm quite introverted. I love working in library conditions on my own. So it wasn't something I was going to do, but she persuaded me. And actually that was really, really good for me, because I can be a bit of a perfectionist, and sometimes that's great because you do a good job, and sometimes it just holds you back from doing things. And I do credit actually deciding to go for it on the canine behaviour side, which felt quite daunting at the beginning, because you work with dogs, you don't know what you're going to get. They can't speak English, you don't know what they're going to be doing, you don't know how the owner's going to react, and you have to be able to respond in the moment and be quite decisive about what you're doing. And I do credit doing an improv course with giving me that extra skill and being a bit braver about just going for something, whereas before I would have spent ages behind my desk planning perfecting and moving bullet points around and all that kind of stuff.
It's really interesting, actually. Acting is a medium to learn new skills. I did a leadership course a while ago where they had us sort of coming up doing role plays and given particular roles to play. So it was like there was your role was the king, which had certain behaviour traits, or the jester, or the mother, or all that sort of thing. I always remember I play music, and I did a brief conducting course, and the guy leading that course said that he'd actually done an acting course to enable him better to impart to the orchestra or the band what it was that he wanted to do. So drawing out facial expressions. So. I wonder if it's something that everyone should do. But it's it's really interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah, I found myself recommending it to people, and they've looked at me funny, but it was, as I said, it was nothing to do with my work. It was just a lovely friend who dragged me along because she didn't want to do it on her own. I loved it, and I loved that idea. There are a few principles that I particularly took away. One was on lesson one, day one, which was the instructor saying, I'm going to ask you to do, various things, and as soon as I ask you, you're going to be very adult about it and decide to stay firmly planted in your seat because you don't know how to do that and you might be rubbish. And he said, I want you to be like, release your inner 3-year-old. Just if you're not sure, just move your legs and stand up. And I think that principle of stand up, don't sit in your chair mulling over whether you can do it, just stand up and do it, has been really useful life lesson to say, stop sitting back and thinking, oh, I can't, I'm not, I'm not perfect. Just stand up and get going. So that was incredibly useful as a lesson, even though it was just one little sentence, asking us to not sit in our chairs and stare at our feet when he asked for volunteers. The other one is the concept in improv of meeting somebody else's offer. So the idea that, you're improvising a scene and maybe in your head you think it's going a certain way, and maybe you've got this really, great joke or funny ending in your head that you're trying to work towards, and suddenly the other person does something you just didn't expect them to do, something completely counter to what you had in mind, and that you have to go with their offer. You can't try and steer it towards the thing that you wanted, because then the whole thing falls apart and it's not entertaining for people. You just have to go with what they've done, run with it, and make the best of it. And again, that was a really useful life lesson and really useful in my job. Go with what people are doing, and rather than trying to manipulate or control something, which, when you're in marketing, you're always controlling and forward planning and trying to manipulate what happens. And sometimes it's just better to roll with what's happening and respond. And you get a far better response when you respond to what's happening rather than trying to manage it all the time.
Absolutely. Natalie, where can people go to find out about you or get in touch with you?
So 2 places. socialandlocal.co.uk is the marketing business and social enterprise, and dogsLikeYours.co.uk is the canine behaviour business.
Great. I will link to both of those in the show notes. Well, Natalie, thank you so much. It's been really interesting hearing about the dual businesses, and best of luck with both of them.
Thank you very much for interviewing me. It's been fun.
Okay, hope you enjoyed that interview with Natalie Weller-Cliff. One of the things that she said, which I found quite interesting, was this idea of having itchy feet and needing to start things anew or change things up a bit every 8 or so years. I don't think this is something which is unique to Natalie, and in fact it's probably something that we could all do as things will change over that period. We don't necessarily need to make wholesale changes to our lives and our careers every 8 to 10 years, but chances are that our life circumstances will have changed over that time, and so the idea of adjusting to meet those needs, the new needs of our life, just kind of makes sense to me. I also loved what Natalie was saying about just standing up and doing something and not getting bogged down in planning and perfecting something before actually taking action. I think that's a really important point, how it's so easy to want something to be perfect right from the get-go. And in reality, whatever it is that we're working on doesn't necessarily need to be perfect from the beginning. The more important thing is just to get it done, get it out there, because it's something that we can improve or tinker with over time. It's certainly something that I need to pay more attention to, and I'm really glad that Natalie made the point. You'll find show notes for this episode on the Change Work Life website. They're at changeworklife.com/42 for episode 42. And it would mean the world to me if you would take just a few seconds just to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that you get your podcasts from. Reviews really do help other people find the show, and if you can leave an honest review, I do like honest 5-star reviews, it has to be said, but if you can leave an honest review, I'd be incredibly grateful. I will see you back here next week for another great interview, and I can't wait to see you then. Cheers. Bye.